to all three. It's fantastic presentation, really exciting. I'm so sorry I didn't get to any of the three cities. But what I want to ask you is, how are you addressing climate change mitigation and particularly alternative power sources? Because none of you really mentioned that.
We'll just have a little bit of that idea. Do I pass it?
I illustrate regarding the windmill industry. You see we have quite a major influence on that. Big companies in the middle of Denmark working here. But we have, for example, in Aarhus, we have an incredibly extensive district heating system. All the houses nearly in Aarhus are supplied by district heating. And the main source has been coal for many years, but that's been transformed to more renewable biomass energy sources. So our profile, our aim is to become CO2 neutral by 2030, but that's a major move just to make that biomass as a source of energy. That alters our profile quite markedly.
Is biomass being produced locally or far away?
Well, some of it's local, yeah. It's an old farming community. We have grass and wood chips. So they're the main sources, I think. But also we're working with solar energy too. But that's, I think Denmark is one of the leading countries in terms of clean tech. And luckily our region is quite central to those strategies. So I think we're contributing quite a lot to that. But I'm sure the Dutch will also have something to say. Not the Italians.
Slightly different climate, sunshine, heat issues in Turin.
Turin is the first city in Italy which discovered the district heating 30 years ago, and now more than 350,000 inhabitants, over 1 million, is served by district heating, which is not supplied by biomass but is supplied by gas, and is a very modern electrical. And to bring the other policies, we use a lot of restriction to the traffic inside the center, and we have several action to put the people over the buses and over the tram and not by own car. And we use restriction for the access inside the city center, and we have a special fare in order to facilitate the people passing for business, for to go to school and so on, from the car and to the bus. And we reaches more than 15% in the rate in more people that go over the bus last year. And so we are one of the top smart cities in Italy. And of course, there are all the other action that we normally put in force in all Europe, probably, like retrofitting of buildings, solar panels. Okay, it's a normal situation, but the structural measure to reach this target is a district heating system and restriction to traffic and to enforce the public transportation network.
Rotterdam?
I will start and then I give it to you. Now it's on every scale we do things for this, like windmills, and we have a city warmth thing, and all the heat of the harbor we use for heating the houses, and we have buildings with green. I think this is also excellent. Really excellent. So warmth and cold. Perhaps you can say more, but on every scale.
My name is Matthijs van Raat, city architect for Rotterdam. The district heating is very important. For years it was powered by a waste plant, importing waste from all over Europe. Well, that's not something we want to do. We have lots of petajoules of warm water from the industries going into the river towards the sea. So we try to combine that. Also try to do be more smart with the cold and the warm water deep underground and try to connect that to the city heating network to try to make it more efficient and more durable. And also connected to all the greenhouses, slightly west of the city. We have a lot of greenhouses where a lot of the vegetables from all over, going all over Europe, are being grown. And we're trying to make people within the city more aware with the water. We have to adapt to water. But a big river coming, lots of water coming from Germany and France through Rotterdam, so we've got the river rising, the water level rising, but also water coming from the sea, but also the heavy rainfall. So we try to do that on different scales. You saw the water square. We don't want the water to go straight into the sewer, but to keep it first, and then when the heavy rainfall is away, all the water from the square goes in. We have several projects of that within the city, and also we want to make the city more green, because green is always good. We were an industrial city, not a lot of green, and green is good for the quality of life. But it's also good for heating, because we had a huge problem with on hot days during summer. There was a 10 degrees difference between the outskirts of the city and the city center, which is an awful lot. So if it is 25 degrees, at some places it's 35 degrees in the city itself, and that's not good for people. So to put in more green. So that's on different scales how we work, but also we try to create more awareness with the people.
Thank you. Gentlemen, back.
Thank you. My name is Chris Smith.
A little bit closer, Chris.
My name is Chris Smith. I'm a senior project director with Argent. Argent is a private sector developer, and the largest scheme that we're involved with currently is a regeneration of an area called King's Cross, which is about a mile up the road from here. I wanted to ask the panel what the relationship was like between the private and public sector, and how important that was in all of your visions.
Should we work this way?
Between the private and public sector, we try more and more to do things together. Of course, everyone has their own responsibility, but we try more and more. Do I get another one again? We try more and more that the private sector understands what is our long-term vision. We are not building. So the private sector, like here, the developers do all the building. And they have most often also the ground, not always, but often also the ground. So they do the developing, and we have some rules, and we try more and more in advantage to tell what the rules are, and then we can do it. At the other side, the private sector is also changing. I mean, we had huge developers, many developers, because of the crisis, we don't have so much anymore, the huge developers, and we have nowadays more and more the smaller people, sometimes little developers, but often also architectural offices. They start to develop things, and they find people, they try to find people who have the money, or they sell it before. So that changes a lot in Holland, especially also Rotterdam. So we have a wider range of people we are working with, but it's also more interesting because it's a different way of working. And for us, it was like, for the municipality, it was a big change because it is very easy. We were used to work with big developers, and they are so, of course, very professional in the way. And architecture offices, or like I told people who just say, I want a house, can you help me? It's a different way to work. So we had really to change and to see that we facilitate these people also very well. But there is a very big connection between public and private, and everyone has this, everyone, but it's the same vision and telling the whole time together what do we want. Someone told me a few weeks ago, you are busy with narrative urban planning. It's another way of doing urban planning, we're talking together, and are we going in the right direction, and everyone from his own side.
Thank you. Whereas,
I think it's tremendously important to have a very close integration between the public and private sector in terms of making sure that we understand each other. Let me just, and it's when things really work, it's almost magical in some respects, and you can draw on the different competencies and the different conditions that are for different sectors. One concrete example was that in our big hub development, it's about, I think, 1 million square meters altogether. That was started just prior to 2008. So when the financial crisis hit, most of the projects were stopped. But because we had in the city made sure that 25% of the housing was public housing or social housing at the harbour front, and they still had the money and resources to push forward projects. They could help the private project owners to push forward and make sure that all the projects didn't go bankrupt and were standing still for years and years. So when you combine the two sectors in the right way, you can actually minimize risk and you can maximize the drive and the momentum to the development and also the direction. So I think it's very important, and when it works, it's almost magical.
Only transformation of the city has been taken by such kind of relationship between public and private. And there are several examples. The first example is the Lingotto factory, which has a private factory that has totally renewed with private funding. And usually the approach that we use is to draw in a partnership with the private in order to design together, which is the transformation process, and to manage the resources for a future public area that usually had been released just after the transformation to the city. So we usually use the resources derived by the transformation permits that we provide to the private to restore the public space that has been leaved to the city for public uses. But it's not only a model for the municipality, it's a model also for the university. For instance, the Polytechnic of Torino has been produced a very important model in partnership with the General Motors that probably the Commission visited during the staying in Torino, to permit the private, which is General Motors, to have an agreement with the Polytechnic of Turin, which is a public university, to permit the restoring of a big building and to stay for research and training of engineers inside. So the model of public-private partnership is a very strong, very well-experienced model. And on a public political note, there is no alternative, especially in this period, to put in force, to enforce such kind of model, because the public debt is too high, and so we have to select where to put the public resources, and we choose to put the public resources especially for big infrastructures, big railway, big metro line, and to manage the surface area with the private in a negotiation process in order to provide the public space derived from private by the valorization of the permits for private. This is a good experience, and that permit to reconvert and transform more than 5 million square meters of brownfields in the last 20 years.
thank you. We've got one over here. I've got about 4 hands I've seen. I feel like someone at an auctioneer looking out for bids. First one, Jan. Is it working?
Janice Sutherland, cabinet members in London. Following on very much from Chris's question, so it's quite a short one. because I wanted to ask.
Can you hold it a bit
I
closer?
wanted to ask how you're managing to sustain public investment in this kind of austerity. And obviously, you each partially answer that in the question. So can we just focus a little bit on, for example, the social housing, how you continue to achieve 25%? Is that fully funded by private developers, or is the state funding going into that as well?
So social housing, how's that funded? Or is it funded in the recession?
Well, in Rotterdam we've got lots and lots of social housing, so it's way more than 25%. A lot of the neighborhoods around the city center, sometimes it was like in Katendrecht, the example, it was almost 100% social housing. So what we try to do with the housing corporation to make a combination of, together with private investors too, but to have a better balance. And therefore, in most regions, we're trying to lower the amount of social housing and put in extra housing, for example, the families that were mentioned earlier in the presentation. But still, of course, lots of the housing around the city center are old houses from the 1920s, 1930s. So with the housing corporation, they fund it themselves. They try to make these housing more durable, so they try to insulate them, because otherwise you have a lot of costs for your energy bill. And sometimes they renew the buildings, and that's funded by themselves. But it is quite limited by the national government, because they have to pay an annual fee to the national government, so therefore their development opportunities have become smaller a little bit, but still they manage to invest within the city, but a little bit less than a few years ago.
Anything on this one?
Yeah, just we've used the opportunity to create social housing in some of the very attractive areas in the city as a way of stimulating the economy. And at national level, which is where there's a national foundation that supports social housing, and the money to the foundation is generated by a haircut on all the rent from the older social housing. So it's sort of financing itself, and I mean the social housing goes back 120, 30 years. So so that hasn't really been struck by the financial crisis. So that in this respect, it's actually a way of sort of gearing the investment fund. Municipality we pay about 10% of the cost of building social housing. So we've been using it to stimulate the economy and making sure that in a time where the private investors are investing so heavily, we can support the building trade and contractors.
There are two key elements to provide the social housing in Italy, especially in Torino. The first one is the rule that each 10% of the total houses derived by urban transformation provided by private should be provided in terms of social. And therefore, since 1995, and this has represent a very consistent stock in terms of social housing. The second key, the second leg, the second pillar is the public national funding dedicated to supply such kind of architecture, such kind of development. And we sometimes use some funding derived by transformation of our area just after the selling to the private sector to build social housing. This is the three main key that we use to provide such kind of policy. There are several national measures, especially in the last 2 years, in order to support local administration to enhance such kind of opportunity to transform. But we don't have any lot of problem about this, because we have a growing stock derived by the rules inside the master plan of 1995, which is still running now.
It sounds like none of these have quite the problems we have here, because they've probably been building more stock and funding more stock over the last 40, 50 years than we have. I've got 5 minutes left, so I've got 1, 2, and I've got one more. And I'm going to take all 3 now and let them pick what they'd like to answer. It may even be, so I go, after you, we've got one more. Okay, these 2. Steve, you're normally first. So 1, 2, 3. So, first of all.
Okay, Simon Ogden from the City of Sheffield in Yorkshire. We're under a lot of pressure now to elect or appoint super mayors for our city regions. Mayors in this country have been more symbolic in the past, except for exceptions like the Mayor of London, who you may have heard of. And I was struck by the descriptions of the 3 cities. The mayor in each one seems to be quite important in the process, but some are elected, some are appointed. Is there a tension between the emphasis on a single leader, man or woman, and the involvement of the public, the community? How do you resolve that tension between a single leader and engaging the public democratically? And if I can just have a little question, how can you have a speed limit for bicycles when you don't have speedometers on them?
So the question is, shall we start with the mayor? Is there a tension between a single lead person in terms of and the community? And what's behind the question is we generally don't have mayors here, except one or 2 or 3. It's normally the political party and the leader of the party, so we don't know who's going to be the leader of it. So is there any tension? I'm sure there isn't.
No, I mean, the sort of the legitimacy of the decisions made by, the mayor and the city council is based on democratic elections. So, I mean, basically, you're only the mayor as long as the people want you there. So, I mean, if there's too much tension, you're gone. So basically, I mean, that is, also one of the reasons why it's very important to make sure that the decisions that you make are founded on a process that involves the people that are influenced by the decisions. So I think I visited Manchester a few weeks ago, and the Greater Manchester area is actually, found a model that's very interesting, where you're not forced, you haven't a forced super mayor, but you have a number of different mayors coming together and appointing a single sort of leader for time who takes charge and are leading processes. But it's on, he's the first among equals, and I think that works quite well.
Anyone else want to comment there?
It's a very good question, because in my opinion, the governance of the city is fundamental, and the respect of the citizen, respect the leadership of the city is fundamental to enhance the process of urban transformation. So, in Italy, at the beginning of the 90s, we have had a very change of philosophical way in terms of election of the mayor. So now, since 1993, the citizens elect directly the mayor, and not the mayor is not elected between the council or inside the council. So it is a fundamental change also in terms of relationship between the community and the leader of the city. That is strongly connected with the feature of the leader, the feature of the habit in which the philosophy of transformation. It's a totally change of perspective, respect our national level, instead in which they are the member of the parliament which provide the vote for the premier. And therefore the parties are more strong in the parliament, the national parliament, respect in the city council. Coming from Rome to Torino, to Milan, to Florence is the same. And in my opinion, it's a good opportunity, especially for the major, the deputy majors and so on, because we are always tested by the citizen that each 5 years have to measure, which is the action, which is the strategy of development, and to each 5 years to promote or not the continuity in the government. The second fundamental rule is that each major cannot remain the leader more than 10 years, more than 2 terms. And this is another important fundamental thing, because we have per law not the opportunity to maintain the same leader in the city for a period longer than 10 years. It is another fundamental opportunity to change and to connect the people, the leadership vision with the election, which is the most important fundamental in democracy.
It's a little bit different in Rotterdam, isn't it?
It's totally different, not only in Rotterdam, but in the Netherlands. But it's a question of some political parties. In Rotterdam and also in the Netherlands, the mayor is not elected by political parties or by persons. It's appointed by the government. And so we always say it's a neutral mayor. He has he comes from a political party, but he is in the city is neutral. And he is again, he can be at least for 4 years, I think, or 6 years. 6 years. He can be there for 6 more years. But the aldermen are the people. He's the leader of the aldermen. The aldermen, they are elected every 4 years by the city, and these give the direction to where the city is going. And of course the city council, which looks after the mayor. So it's a different way, and the mayor is only responsible for safety, because in Holland people say safety in the city or safety in the region is not has not to be something doing which political color you have. It's important, so he's responsible for safety. And of course, he gives the direction. He does things because he's the mayor. Not
One more, just that one. For those of you who are trying to conceptualize that, it's probably a little bit more like a governor general. That in days of empire, those of you old enough to remember, were in places like Australia and so on. Last comment or question.
I'm Graham Nicholson from Blue Sail, which is a destination tourism consultancy. And we heard a lot about engaging local communities and local benefits for local people. But I wondered whether you had in your process any specific objectives for developing the visitor economy. How important investment for tourism development has been in your process?
Okay, tourism and investing on that side.
As I highlighted in the presentation, very quick, I apologize. And for us, tourism is a fundamental task because we have three different categories of touristic attraction. The first one is related to the mountains, and as we host the 20 Olympic Winter Games, with a very well connection with the ski resort, is a fundamental task, especially for our airport, and to draw also from the UK, a lot of people that came in Torino to enjoy Alps and Western Alps, which is one of the most fundamental tasks. The second one is the Congress tourism, because Italy is well known abroad for Rome, Florence and Venice, anything else, especially from China, Southeast and United States. And Torino, therefore, should focus over some specific touristic classes connected to the vocation of the city, especially the Congress, Scientific Congress, and all these kind of automotive district Congress and so on. And the third is our Baroque heritage connected to the royal palaces, the effort that we put in order to restore the city center, and is another types of cultural activity, very, very high-skilled touristic presence, which enjoy Italian food, Italian heritage, Italian landscape, and also Italian heritage in terms of royal palaces. So our touristic agency, which is founded by private sector and public sector, is focused on these broad categories and putting forth specific action in order to attract tourists. So only one figure, I conclude. And in 2001, we have 1.5 million touristic presence. In 2013, we reached 6 million touristic presence inside the district. So it's a fundamental task for the future development of the city.
As I mentioned, we will be the European Capital of the Country in 2017. We use that as a window of opportunity to draw in more people. We're actually experiencing quite a large increase in the number of tourists right now, which is driven primarily through business tourism, or congresses and seminars and stuff like that. But we're developing our tourist attractions right now. We have about 3 or 4 major tourist attractions, all averaging around 500 to 600,000 visitors a year. So they are, I mean, primarily regional tourists, but more and more international tourists visiting those as well.
And Rotterdam.
Well, we have been a city that wasn't visited frequently by people from abroad. We try to change that, of course. We've got a few major visitor attractions, like the zoo, which is one of the most well-known in the Netherlands. So we've got these attractions that we try to do more. And for example, we've got Rotterdam partners who try to not only for the economy but also for tourism, try to stimulate the amount of people that come to Rotterdam. And we've also got a festival agency who try to have different festivals in different themes that are related to the city of Rotterdam and Rotterdam, what we are. For example, a port festival, because we are one of the biggest ports in the world. We try to have good architecture. We are known for architecture, so we've got an architecture festival. We've got quite a young population, so we've got a lot of youth festivals, for example, and also the multicultural festival. So we try to do different things to attract people to Rotterdam, but always in perspective of the city of Rotterdam. Not only just a fun thing to do, but also trying to connect it to the city. And well, what we see is that the number of people coming to Rotterdam is growing a lot. And of course, being in the New York Times helps a lot. We monitor the amounts of people coming to Rotterdam, the amount of nights they stay, and with the New York Times we saw a lot of people from America booking hotels in Rotterdam, and that shows us that we're doing it right. So also monitoring is very important to know what is right, what works and what not.
Great, thank you. We take that as the last one. We're going to draw a few strands together. I think we've had an excellent exposition in terms of presentations, but also some answers for some pretty meaty questions, whether it's about funding or social housing, and really positive one there on tourism and visitor strategies. I think some of the headlines I've tried to draw out, they include a vision and ambition for change. These are not places that have stood still. Key elements include infrastructure, rail, light rail, bridges, the amazing market building in Rotterdam, for instance. Innovation, in all of the very bold innovation sometimes, not small, big projects. They're doing small things in the recession as infill, but they've done some really bold and innovative things, sometimes for decades now. Marker events, things like the Olympics, European City of Culture, somewhere to get the city branded and out there in front of the wider world. Involving citizens was coming through phenomenally. You've all done lots of things both in central areas and neighbourhoods and beyond, but also involving partners, agencies, universities, and sometimes the people outside the city boundary too. So there is a strong sense I'm picking up of not just leadership, we picked up leadership in mayors, but a sense of collaborative. A modern form of leadership is not one person at the top that's engaging in bringing others with us. But perhaps something that for me and maybe some of you came through was that logo, Smile with Us, or Smile with Us, from our house. And I think that maybe exemplifies some of the themes that these modernising cities and progressive cities are about. They seem to be cities as a vehicle for providing happiness and well-being. They're not simply about buildings and economy and isolation, they're more. So I thought that was a really interesting area to begin to explore, and I would say that, wouldn't I, because that sounds to me like a very good idea for a Congress, which of course is what we're going to be doing next June. Remember, it slipped from May to June because of a general election. So our Birmingham Congress will be around happiness and well-being in the city. So you're all welcome to come to that. Details will be coming out soon. I'd just like to say thank you to the speakers. We're looking forward to seeing everyone tomorrow who's going to be at the awards lunch. And there are drinks and food still around for everyone who's able to stay a bit longer. Can you please warmly thank all our wonderful finalists?